Welcome to Iron Financial. This is the show where we help you forge a stronger portfolio by stress testing the market's biggest ideas. Now today, we are going deep. We're not just looking at a stock, we're examining the architectural blueprint for what could become a new fortress of American infrastructure. The company is NextNav, ticker symbol NN.
And it's a fascinating story because it all starts with a deep structural crack in the very foundation of the entire U.S. economy, a fundamental weakness that most people frankly don't even know exists.
Look, every complex structure, every massive system has a load-bearing wall, a central pillar that holds everything else up. For the modern American economy, that pillar is far more fragile than anyone in charge is willing to admit. We're talking about a vulnerability that dictates, well, everything. It dictates our shipping logistics, the exact timing of our stock trades, the stability of the power grid, even your morning commute. And if this one pillar fails, we are not talking about a market correction or a recession. We are talking about a full, grinding national shutdown.
Right, and don't for a second think this is some abstract threat you'd see in a spy movie. This isn't theoretical. It's tied directly to the very device you might be watching this on right now. Your phone, your car's navigation, the ATM you pull cash from, the credit card terminal at the grocery store. Every single one of them relies on this one single, incredibly fragile system. Our entire multi-trillion-dollar economy is built on a very dangerous assumption that this system will always be there, always be on, and always be accurate.
And into this void, into this critical vulnerability, steps a company called NextNav. They claim to have the blueprint, the assets, and the technology to shore up this national weakness. They're positioning themselves as a new, essential layer of national and economic security. But hold on, that's the narrative. That's the story they're selling. And here at Iron Financial, we don't invest in narratives. We put them on the rack and we stress test them. Our job, our only job, is to find out if NextNav is actually building a solid steel fortress capable of weathering any storm, or if this is just another speculative house of cards built on hype, waiting for one strong gust of wind to blow it all down.
Okay, let's get into the hard details. Section 1, America's Fragile Lifeline. So this single point of failure, this fragile system holding up our entire economy, is something we all use every day, the Global Positioning System, or GPS. Now, we all think of it for getting directions on our phones, but that's just the surface. Its true function is much, much deeper, and its weakness is far more dangerous than you realize.
So the first crucial point you absolutely have to grasp is that GPS is not infallible, not even close. It's a network of satellites orbiting the Earth, sending down incredibly weak signals from thousands of miles up in space. By the time they get to your phone, those signals are faint whispers. They can't penetrate buildings well, which is why your GPS gets wonky indoors. They get lost and bounce around in dense cities, what engineers call urban canyons. But even worse, they can be deliberately attacked. Jamming is the simplest form. It's just drowning out that faint signal with loud radio noise. Spoofing is way more sinister. That's when an attacker feeds false location and timing data to a receiver, tricking a plane, a ship, or a power grid into thinking it's somewhere it's not. GPS was an absolute marvel of the 20th century, but it has some very critical, very exploitable 21st century flaws.
And please do not mistake this for some hypothetical war game scenario. This is happening right now. In fact, NextNav's own investor deck highlights a recent incident right over Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. A simple, mysterious jammer, probably just some device in the back of a truck, was powerful enough to disrupt airport operations and actually ground flights. Think about that. A single, unsophisticated attack caused immediate, real, measurable economic damage. Now scale that up in your mind. Imagine a coordinated attack on our ports, our financial markets, our power grid. The foundation of our economy starts to look less like solid concrete and a whole lot more like quicksand. And this is the part that is truly terrifying. Creating this kind of widespread chaos doesn't require a nation-state's budget or a sophisticated military. A DARPA project, and remember, that's the Pentagon's own advanced research arm, they proved you could build a device capable of mass disruption for less than $300. $300. That's the price of entry to create what they called a very bad day for the American military. So the threat isn't just from a foreign power. It's from any disgruntled hacker in their basement. The risk here is completely asymmetrical, and it is absolutely massive. Okay, so the problem is clear, it's cheap to exploit, and the potential consequences are severe. That is the setup. That's the vulnerability in the market. Now let's get into the engineering and analyze the solution that NextNav is putting on the table. They are not proposing to replace GPS. What they want to build is a resilient, ground-based fortress that can back it up and take over when it fails. The core of their entire plan is something they call terrestrial PNT. Now, PNT just stands for positioning, navigation, and timing. Those are the three critical services that GPS provides. But instead of relying on weak signals from space, NextNav uses powerful encrypted signals from ground-based transmitters. And here's the financially critical part of their blueprint. They are not planning on building a whole new network of towers from scratch. They plan to integrate their technology onto existing 5G cell towers. From an investment perspective, this is huge. It's a capital-light model that massively reduces upfront cost and construction time. It's like building a fortress without having to quarry the stone, cut it, and haul it yourself.
Okay, hold on a second. Capital light sounds great on a PowerPoint slide, but a brilliant blueprint doesn't automatically equal a profitable company. There's a massive chasm between a cool concept and actual recurring cash flow. For this to work, they need the big telecom giants on board. They need absolute government buy-in. And most importantly, they need a clear path to getting paid for this service. So is this just a public service project that's going to bleed cash forever? Or is it a real business with a solid, defensible revenue model? That is the only question that actually matters to an investor.
And that is exactly the right question to ask. And NextNav, to their credit, has an answer. This is not just some concept in a lab. They have already laid the groundwork. And these partnerships you see here are the steel structural beams of the entire business case. Look at this list. AT&T and Verizon are already on board for testing, the very companies whose towers they need to use. That is a massive de-risking event. You've got NASA validating the technology's performance. They even have international validation from Japan's Metcom, who is building a similar system. This proves there's real, tangible demand from the biggest, most serious players in the game.
Okay, Section 3, the billion-dollar asset. So we have the problem, and we have a blueprint with some very serious backers. Now let's get down to the absolute foundation of this entire structure. What is the single asset that makes this entire fortress possible? What does NextNav actually own that gives them the right to even be at the table?
This right here, this is the bedrock of the entire company, spectrum. Now, for those who don't live and breathe telecom, the easiest way to think of spectrum is as invisible real estate. It's the radio frequencies that allow for all wireless communication. And just like with physical real estate, location matters. NextNav owns a massive nationwide portfolio of licenses in what's called the lower 900 MHz band. This is prime real estate for their purpose. Its signals travel very far and, critically, they penetrate buildings, directly correcting the two core weaknesses of GPS. This is a finite, government-licensed, and incredibly valuable asset that they own outright. It's their plot of land.
Now, to put the sheer scale of this asset into perspective, we measure spectrum value in something called MHC pops. It's just the amount of spectrum multiplied by the population it covers. NextNav controls over 4 billion MHC pops. What that translates to, in plain English, is that they hold the licenses covering more than 96% of the US population. They are not a regional player. They own the land coast to coast to build a truly nationwide network.
And if we're going to talk about the value of their asset, let's talk about the value of the problem they're trying to solve. This is why this entire story matters to investors. An analysis by the Brattle Group, which was filed with the FCC, actually quantified the economic damage of a major GPS outage. A single day without GPS would cost the U.S. economy $1.6 billion. A month-long outage, we're talking nearly $60 billion in direct losses. These are absolutely staggering numbers. NextNav isn't selling a convenience app for your phone. They're selling an insurance policy against an economic catastrophe. And believe me, that is a very powerful story to tell to Wall Street.
All right, Section 4, stress testing the financials. So we've seen the core asset, we understand the critical need for this service, and the blueprint looks solid, at least on paper. But a blueprint is only as good as the materials you use and the crew doing the building. So it's time to put this whole thing under pressure. Let's really stress test the financials and the execution risks, and let's see where the cracks start to appear.
So first, let's start with the regulatory framework. Because for a company like this, the FCC is everything. And the progress here, you have to admit, looks undeniably strong. They are not fighting the government on this, they're working directly with them. Back in March 2025, the FCC adopted what's called a Notice of Inquiry with a unanimous 4-0 bipartisan vote. That is a powerful signal in Washington. Then in July, they approved the consolidation of NextNav's license portfolio. And just this past March, the FCC officially sent a notice of rulemaking for PNT services to the White House. This is a clear, methodical, step-by-step progression. It looks like the government is literally laying the paving stones for NextNav's road to commercialization.
Whoa. Pump the brakes. Paving stones are great, but the government works on its own schedule, and it's usually not a fast one.
This quote from NextNav's own CEO, Mariam Sarand, is the single biggest risk factor on the entire table. Her words, "The timing of FCC processes remains unpredictable." Unpredictable, that's the killer word right there. All of that positive momentum is completely meaningless until the final rule is published and they get the green light. The timeline is totally out of their control. This multi-billion-dollar idea is waiting for one signature from one agency. From an investor's perspective, that is a massive concentration of risk.
Exactly. And that regulatory waiting game brings us directly to the numbers, the balance sheet. On one hand, they have a fortress of a balance sheet, ending the fourth quarter of 2025 with $152.1 million in cash and marketable securities. That is the war chest. That's the money that buys them time to weather these bureaucratic delays.
But that war chest has a giant siege engine pointed right at it. They reported a net loss of $68 million for that same quarter. Now, you don't need a fancy financial model to see that a $152 million fortress cannot withstand a $68 million quarterly barrage for very long. The clock is ticking, loudly.
And this is precisely why you have to read past the headline numbers and dig into the financial statements. That $68 million net loss looks absolutely terrifying. I get it, but it is not the whole story. When you dig into their report, you find that a huge chunk of that, $48 million, was from non-cash charges. These are accounting adjustments tied to the valuation of warrants and derivatives based on their stock price. It is not cash walking out the door to pay for salaries or rent. The real operational cash burn is still a critical factor, don't get me wrong, but it's far, far lower than that scary headline number suggests. The context is crucial here. It means their financial fortress is stronger and their runway is significantly longer than it appears at first glance.
Okay, that brings us to Section 5, the verdict. We've examined the foundation, which is their spectrum. We've analyzed the blueprint, the PNT network, and we have stress-tested the financials. And now it's time to render a verdict. So after all of this analysis, is NextNav a durable fortress of national importance, or is it a highly speculative house of cards that's just waiting to collapse?
So let's lay it all out on the table, nice and clear. The structural pillars supporting this company are solid. 1. They have a strategic and frankly irreplaceable spectrum asset. 2. They are addressing a critical and now verified national security need. And 3. They have major industry partnerships with the big telcos that enable their capital-light deployment model. But the fault lines, the potential cracks are just as clear. 1. They are pre-profit and they do have a real cash burn, even after you account for the non-cash charges. 2. Their entire future hinges on that unpredictable FCC timeline. We can't say that enough. And 3. They operate in a competitive market and, like any pre-revenue company, are exposed to the volatility of the financial markets. It is a very high-stakes balance.
And this brings us right to the final critical question for you, the investor. Are you buying into the ground floor of what could become a piece of essential American infrastructure, like a utility, with decades of predictable, high-margin revenue ahead of it? The bull case sees a fortress being built brick by brick. Or is this just a high-risk, binary bet on the speed and whims of a single government agency? The bear case sees a beautifully designed house of cards that's just waiting on a political breeze to knock it over. The structure is designed, the foundation has been poured, but the final building permit is still pending. And as an investor, that is the decision you have to make.
That's our analysis.
We're Iron Financial. We'll see you next time.
Quick disclaimer, everything I share is for entertainment and informational purposes only. I'm not a financial advisor, so please do your own research or talk to a professional before making any moves with your money.